It was a Wednesday. The sort of Wednesday that felt like a Tuesday, and somehow made you wish it was already Friday. In the flickering fluorescent light of his cubicle, Chen-Ji sat hunched over his desk, the gray smudge of exhaustion under his eyes telling a tale of too many late nights spent chasing down faulty circuits and malfunctioning grids. As an electrical engineer for one of the largest power corporations in the country, it was his job to keep the lights on, literally. And he did it well, or at least he tried to, despite the endless paperwork and the endless complaints from his superior, Mr. Zhang, who seemed to think that the power grid was a poorly oiled machine. Chen. Mr. Zhang barked over the intercom, his voice grating through the speakers. The west side of the city is on the brink of a blackout. I need you to fix this now. What are you doing, watching cat videos on YouTube? Chen barely held back a sigh, though he couldn't quite suppress the roll of his eyes. He had no interest in cats, real or digital, but the humor of being accused of such a thing, in the midst of balancing energy loads, wasn't lost on him. A black and white picture of a cat wearing glasses filled the corner of his screen, laughing at the absurdity of the moment. Pushing the joke aside, he snapped into action, grabbing his toolkit and heading down to the facility's central control room. It was a cavernous space filled with hums and clicks, blinking lights, and rows of screens showing real-time data of power usage across the city. Chen's expertise had always been in the connections, the junctions where power flowed and the intricate systems that kept the whole thing running. It was, in many ways, a boring job, but one that had a certain order to it, and Chen liked that. As he approached the console, his fingers danced over the controls, shifting dials and adjusting power outputs. The system was stable, but the pressure was mounting. He could feel his pulse quickening as the alarms on the wall started flashing red. The energy grid was failing, and if it went down, the entire western side of the city would be plunged into darkness. He didn't have much time. Why is the backup generator still offline? Chen muttered, his eyes scanning the screen for a fault in the system. Then, it happened. A sudden surge of power rocketed through the wires like a lightning strike, and Chen barely had time to react. The control panel in front of him exploded in a flash of bright light, a sharp crack of energy that sent him reeling backward. His hands shot out to grab the console, but instead of feeling metal and circuitry, his fingers brushed against something far stranger. It was a sensation, more like an electrical current than physical material. His senses blurred, and in that instant, the world around him seemed to shift. He could hear the hum of electricity vibrating through the air, feel it pulsing through his body, like it was alive. Inside of him, the world was no longer just a room full of wires and screens. It was alive, a network of electric pulses, shifting currents, and digital voices calling out from all directions. For a moment, he was lost in the sensation, a floating sense of awareness between the physical and the digital, until the sudden jolt of another electrical surge snapped him back to reality. Chen blinked hard and steadied himself. His head ached, and his palms were sweaty from the sudden adrenaline rush. His eyes scanned the room, the air still crackling with the electric energy he'd just felt. The lights above flickered ominously before stabilizing, but something was different now. Chen, what the hell just happened? Mr. Zhang's voice crackled through his headset, but it sounded distant. Almost like an echo. Chen looked down at his hands, his breath shallow. I think I might have just died for a second there. Mr. Zhang was silent for a long moment, before muttering, "What the hell are you talking about? Get back to work." But Chen couldn't focus. He was still reeling from what had just happened. That sensation, he couldn't explain it. The surge had passed, but something else had taken root inside him. Something more than electricity, like he was somehow one with the energy itself. His mind buzzed, processing the feeling, the inexplicable sense of control. Shaking his head, Chen pressed his palm against the console again, trying to clear his thoughts. That's when it happened. The lights on the console flickered once more, but this time, he didn't have to touch anything. He could feel the power shifting, almost like he was controlling it. Without thinking, he mentally willed the power grid to stabilize, and just like that, the screens blinked, the alarms stopped, and the grid hummed back to life. Chen stared at the console in disbelief. What had just happened? He hadn't even touched the controls. He'd willed it. He rubbed his temples. Maybe it was just the shock of the explosion, but then, the realization hit him. He had done something impossible. The faint hum of electricity in the air around him pulsed again, and for the first time in his life, Chen understood it. Not just as a technician or engineer, but as something that flowed through him. He could feel it. I can control this, he thought, and instantly, the lights in the room dimmed, then brightened, flickered, and then steadied themselves. He was controlling the lights. The power, Chen. Mr. Zhang's voice again, this time sharp, irritated. What the hell is going on in there? Chen snapped back to reality, his hand still hovering over the console. He quickly released the power, and the lights flickered back to normal. The grid was stable, the city's energy had been restored, but something else had changed. He wasn't sure how, but the electric pulse had seeped into him, and now, he was different. Not just in the way he could control the grid, but in the way he felt connected to everything, every current, every circuit. What the hell is going on? He whispered to himself. At home, Chen sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the glowing blue screen of his laptop. He tried to convince himself that what had happened at work was just a fluke, a freak accident. Maybe he had just been too tired, too worn out by the constant demands of his job, but then, his phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. A notification. A news article popped up on his screen. Massive cyber attack on global infrastructure. Citywide power grid collapses across the Western Hemisphere. Chen's stomach turned. He read the article in a daze, his mind racing. He recognized the digital footprints of the attack, an unprecedented surge, a fault line running through the heart of global systems. The very thing he had felt earlier that day, and then, as if to further confirm his fears, he felt the pull again. It was a strange sensation, like a connection being made between his mind and an unseen network. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. He could sense something in the digital air, a ripple, like electricity flowing through the lines of code itself. Without thinking, he clicked open a deeper layer of the internet, something encrypted, something hidden beneath the surface, and there it was. A string of data that didn't belong. A file with a strange label, Project Nexus. Chen felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what that file meant. This was no accident. Someone had been testing global infrastructure systems like a giant game, and he was now part of that game, whether he liked it or not. He clicked. The file opened, and in that moment, everything changed. The file that opened before Chen was a labyrinth of encrypted data and obscure codes. He had seen this kind of thing before, long strings of numbers that didn't seem to mean anything at first glance. But this time was different. As soon as the file appeared, something in the back of his mind clicked, like a switch being flipped. He could feel the data, the way it moved and shifted within his own thoughts, like an electrical current rippling through his brain. He leaned closer to the screen, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. It wasn't just information, it was alive, in some strange, unnatural way. The file seemed to respond to his presence, shifting and rearranging itself, offering up pieces of code as if it were trying to speak to him. The deeper he delved into the data, the more it began to make sense, and the more he realized just how dangerous it was. The file contained blueprints for a massive surveillance system, far more sophisticated than anything he'd ever seen before. It was a network that didn't just monitor data, it controlled it, shaping and manipulating everything from political decisions to global financial markets. Chen's mind raced as he scrolled through the layers of encryption, each layer more complex than the last. Whoever had created this system was beyond skilled. This was the kind of thing that took decades of planning, resources, and expertise. But the more he uncovered, the clearer it became. The system was already in place. This wasn't some distant, theoretical project. It was happening right now. And the worst part? Chen was at the center of it. A sudden surge of energy coursed through him. The data in front of him wasn't just code anymore. It was like a living organism, an electric pulse moving in rhythm with his own thoughts. Without realizing it, he was manipulating the data, bending it to his will. The feeling was intoxicating. He could sense every connection, every relay. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sensation wash over him. It was as if he could see the world through a different lens, a digital lens, where information flowed like currents of electricity through his mind. He could feel the pulse of every network, every server, every piece of data that connected the planet. The power was overwhelming, and for a moment, it made him feel invincible. But that invincibility was short-lived. A cold realization settled in. The system wasn't just a network. It was a trap, a global web designed to ensnare people like him, to control and monitor every aspect of their lives. And Chen had just stumbled right into the heart of it. His heart thudded in his chest as he pulled his hands away from the keyboard, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But it was too late. The moment he accessed the file, he had triggered something that was now aware of his presence. Chen's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have opened that file, Chen." His blood ran cold. How did they know his name? How did they know what he'd just done? Before he could respond, another message appeared: "We've been watching you." A chill crept up his spine. He had a sudden urge to disconnect, to turn off the computer and run. But something told him that wouldn't matter. The moment he'd touched that file, he'd become part of something much bigger than himself. Suddenly, a new window popped up on his screen. It wasn't a message, it was a live feed, a video. It showed him, his own apartment, through the lens of his laptop's webcam. The feed was grainy, but it was unmistakable. He could see the clutter of his desk, the worn chair by the window, the half-eaten takeout containers on the counter. But the most chilling part was the shadow in the corner of the room. Someone was watching him. Chen's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. Whoever was behind this system had access to everything. They knew where he was, they knew what he was doing, and they had been tracking him for far longer than he could imagine. The feed cut off abruptly, replaced by a simple message: "If you want to survive, you'll need help." For the first time, Chen felt a cold shiver of fear. He wasn't sure who had sent the message, or how they knew what was happening, but one thing was clear: he was no longer just an observer. He was a player in this game. Desperately, Chen grabbed his phone and dialed the number of his old friend, Mia. Mia was one of the best hackers in the world, someone who could slip through digital cracks faster than a shadow. He'd met her years ago at a tech conference, where they'd bonded over their shared love of cracking codes and manipulating systems. She picked up after the first ring. "Chen?" Mia's voice was laced with concern. "What's going on? You sound off." "I need your help," Chen said, his voice low. "I think I've just uncovered something big, something dangerous. I need to show you what I found." "Are you in trouble?" Mia asked. "Chen, what's going on?" Chen hesitated for a moment, but then, with a grim determination, he told her everything: about the file, about the surveillance system, and about the strange sensation he had when he accessed it. Mia listened in silence, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're not crazy," she finally said. "But this is bigger than you think. You've just stepped into the middle of a global power struggle. People have been building this surveillance system for years, and they won't let you walk away from it. Not without consequences." "Then what do I do?" Chen asked, his voice desperate. "Get off the grid. Right now. Don't trust your devices. Don't trust anything connected to the internet. We need to get you out of there, and we need to move fast." Before he could ask another question, the call ended abruptly. Chen stared at his phone, his heart racing. He hadn't realized how deeply he'd become entangled in this web until now. But Mia was right, he had to get out. Fast. Without wasting another second, Chen grabbed his jacket and hurried out of the apartment. The streets outside were buzzing with the usual late-night energy of the city, people walking home from bars, the distant hum of traffic. But Chen's mind was elsewhere. His body moved on autopilot as he walked toward the subway station, his thoughts racing. He had no idea who was after him, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about hacking into a file. It was about something far more dangerous. This wasn't just about accessing information, it was about controlling it. And now, he was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that reached further than he could have ever imagined. The deeper he got, the more it seemed like the world was a vast network of connections, all leading back to a central point. The power he had experienced, the ability to manipulate the flow of data, was no accident. He had been chosen, but he didn't know by whom. As he descended into the depths of the subway, a strange thought flickered in his mind. What if this was all part of a much larger plan? What if, in some twisted way, he was the key to something even bigger than himself? He wasn't sure if he was ready to find out, but there was no turning back now. Chen's footsteps echoed in the cavernous subway station, the noise of the city above him muffled by the concrete and steel of the underground. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him, even though the station was relatively empty. He kept his head down, moving quickly toward the platform. His mind raced as he tried to piece together everything that had happened over the past few hours, but each time he tried to make sense of it, the pieces slipped further apart. His phone buzzed again, and Chen nearly jumped out of his skin. It was a text from Mia: "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th, move fast." His heart skipped a beat. The urgency in Mia's message was unmistakable. He quickly tapped out a reply, asking if she was sure it was safe, but the reply came almost immediately: "They're already looking for you. Don't ask questions. Just come." Chen didn't hesitate this time. He knew better than to question Mia when she sounded like that. She knew the game, the stakes, and how to survive it. He moved quickly, slipping through the turnstile and darting down the dark tunnel toward the exit, trying not to draw attention to himself. As he reached the surface, the crisp night air hit him like a wave. The streets were quieter now, the hum of the city less pronounced. It felt almost as if the world had gone still, as though everyone and everything was holding its breath. Chen felt like a fugitive, even though he hadn't done anything more than stumble upon the wrong file. But he knew better than to think this was just a coincidence. The warehouse was only a few blocks away. He moved quickly but carefully, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, half expecting someone to be following him. When he finally arrived, the building loomed before him like an industrial ghost, dark, hulking, and abandoned. A low hum echoed from inside, but there was no sign of life on the outside. Chen pulled open the heavy metal door and stepped into the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old machinery, the walls lined with shelves of forgotten equipment. In the far corner, Mia stood with her back to him, her arms crossed, staring at a bank of monitors. "You're late," she said without turning around. Her voice had a cool edge to it, but Chen could hear the concern buried underneath. "You have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" Chen didn't respond right away. He was too busy scanning the room for any signs of danger, any shadow that might move a little too fast or a sound that was just a little too quiet. But the warehouse was empty, save for Mia and the hum of the machines. "Do you have any idea what's going on, Mia?" he asked, his voice low. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him, the burden of knowledge that had come with opening that file. "I mean, what is this? I thought I was just looking at some random hacker's project, but this goes way beyond that. This is global. It's everything." Mia didn't answer immediately. She stood for a moment, staring at the screens, her fingers tapping nervously on the console. Finally, she spoke. "It's a data manipulation program," she said slowly. "A global one. The file you found, it's not just some data feed. It's the control center for every digital device, every electronic signal across the planet. Think of it like a hidden hand, pulling the strings on every network, every system. If they can control the data, they can control everything. The stock market, the government, the media, it's all part of the plan. Chen's mind spun as he processed what Mia was saying. He had thought the system was just monitoring data, like some kind of surveillance. But this was something else. It wasn't just about watching, it was about shaping the world itself. But how? How do they even control all this? He asked. His voice was shaky, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to know. Mia turned to face him then, her eyes serious. The system you stumbled on, it's the key to everything. It's not just a network, it's a living, breathing digital entity. Whoever controls it controls the flow of information, which means they can control everything. They can manipulate events, influence political decisions, crash markets, even cause wars. This isn't about hacking into some database, it's about owning the very pulse of the world. Chen swallowed hard. He had no idea the scale of what he had uncovered. He had just thought he was poking around, being curious. But now, he realized, his curiosity had opened a door that shouldn't have been opened. A door that had been carefully hidden, locked, and guarded by powerful forces. So what do we do now? Chen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia didn't answer right away. She turned back to the monitors, her fingers flying over the keys. We don't have much time. The people behind this system, they've been watching you since you opened that file. They know who you are. They know everything about you. And they're coming for you. If we're going to stop them, we need to shut the system down, but it's not going to be easy. You can't just unplug it like a regular server. This thing is embedded in the infrastructure of the world. Chen felt his pulse quicken. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, the knowledge that he was part of something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. But he also felt a strange sense of determination, a pull toward something he couldn't explain. Where do we start? He asked. Mia glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. We start with the source. The server that controls everything. It's hidden in plain sight, buried deep inside the global network. If we can find it, we can destroy it, and with it, the control system. Chen nodded, though he didn't fully understand what Mia was talking about. He was still trying to process the idea that he was at the center of a global conspiracy, but there wasn't time to think about that now. There was only one thing to do: stop them before it was too late. Without another word, Mia turned to the screens, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. Chen watched as she pulled up layers of code, tracing the threads of the global network. It was like watching a master at work. Mia was calm, precise, every movement purposeful. She was in her element, and Chen felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But the more they dug, the more they uncovered. The system was vast, sprawling across every corner of the planet, hidden behind layers of firewalls and security measures that seemed impossible to bypass. But Mia was relentless, and with Chen's new abilities, his understanding of the network itself, they began to make progress. They spent hours in the warehouse, tracing the connections, pulling apart the layers of encryption. It wasn't easy. Every time they thought they were close, the system seemed to adapt, shifting and morphing to protect itself. But Chen could feel it, deep in his bones, the power of the network, the electricity flowing through the wires, through the air, through him. It was like he was part of it, and it was part of him. He could sense the pathways, the digital veins running beneath the surface, and it became easier to navigate, to bypass the walls. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mia let out a low, triumphant laugh. Got it. Chen turned to look at the screen. It was the control center. The heart of the system. Now came the hard part. Mia turned to him, her face serious. You're the only one who can do this. You're the key. Chen nodded, even though a knot of fear twisted in his stomach. He didn't know if he was ready for what was about to happen. But he knew one thing for sure: there was no going back. With a deep breath, Chen reached out toward the screen. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he let the current flow through him completely. He could feel the power, the data, the pulse of the network. And with a single thought, he willed it to stop.